They wore cowboy hats, sang about love and heartbreak, and became symbols of tradition. But behind the spotlight, some of country music's most recognizable voices were hiding a truth they weren't allowed to share. In an industry built on image and expectation, coming out could mean losing everything. Yet against all odds, these artists chose honesty over silence. And when they finally revealed who they really were, country music was never the same again. Chambersh number 11, Chelly Wright, Image. She had everything a country star was supposed to have: a chart-topping hit, a flawless image, and a future that looked untouchable. By the late 1990s, Chelly Wright wasn't just another singer trying to make it in Nashville. She was Nashville. Her breakout hit, Single White Female, shot to number 1. Her smile lit up award shows, and she became the kind of artist labels loved: safe, relatable, and perfectly aligned with the traditional values country music had built its identity on. But behind that polished image, there was a truth she was desperately trying to outrun. For years, Wright lived a double life. On stage, she sang about love the way fans expected. Offstage, she was silently battling a reality she believed could destroy everything she had worked for. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the country industry wasn't just conservative. It was unforgiving. Being openly gay wasn't just controversial, it was career-ending. And she knew it, so she hid it. Carefully, completely. The pressure didn't just build, it consumed her. Wright later revealed that she fell into deep depression, isolation, and even reached a breaking point where she contemplated ending her life. The cost of silence was becoming heavier than the fear of the truth. Then, in 2010, everything changed. In a move that shocked the entire industry, Chelly Wright publicly came out as gay, becoming the first major mainstream country artist to do so at the height of a recognizable career. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't speculation. It was her, standing in front of the world, finally telling the truth she had hidden for so long. The reaction? Immediate. Brutal. And exactly what she had feared. Radio stations stopped playing her music. Industry doors quietly closed. Fans disappeared. Within months, the career she had spent years building began to unravel. But something else happened too. For the first time in her life, she was free. Wright later said that losing her career was devastating, but losing herself would have been worse. And over time, her story became something bigger than chart positions or radio spins. It became a turning point, a moment that cracked open a conversation country music had avoided for decades. Because Chelly Wright didn't just come out, she exposed a reality the industry had tried to keep hidden. And even if it cost her everything, she made sure the next generation wouldn't have to pay the same price. Number 10, T.J. Osborne. For decades, country music operated within a very specific image. Male stars were expected to embody a traditional ideal: rugged, masculine, and unquestionably straight. It wasn't a written rule, but it shaped careers, public perception, and the boundaries of what artists felt safe to reveal. T.J. Osborne grew up understanding that reality all too well. As one half of the award-winning duo Brothers Osborne, he didn't enter the industry as an outsider struggling for recognition. By the late 2010s, he had already achieved major success. Hit songs on the charts, critical acclaim, and a solid place within Nashville's inner circle. From the outside, everything looked secure. But privately, there was a part of his life he kept carefully separate. Unlike earlier generations of artists who feared they might never succeed if they told the truth, Osborne faced a different kind of dilemma. He had already built his career. The real question was whether being honest about who he was could quietly dismantle everything he had earned. In an industry known for its conservative roots, that risk was impossible to ignore. For years, he chose silence, not out of shame, but out of awareness. He understood how fragile acceptance could be, and how quickly perception could shift. That changed in 2021. In a calm and deliberate decision, T.J. Osborne publicly came out as gay. There was no scandal, no dramatic reveal, just a straightforward acknowledgement of who he was. But the significance of that moment was enormous. He became the first openly gay male artist signed to a major country label while still actively releasing and charting music. What followed surprised many people. Instead of the backlash that had defined earlier stories in country music, Osborne received widespread support. Fans stood by him. Fellow artists voiced encouragement. The industry, which once seemed resistant to change, didn't turn away. Radio continued to play his music, and his career remained intact. In fact, not long after coming out, Brothers Osborne won a Grammy, a moment that symbolized something far bigger than a single award. TJ Osborne's story represents a shift. Where previous artists had to choose between authenticity and survival, he became proof that those two things no longer had to be mutually exclusive. His journey doesn't erase the struggles that came before, but it highlights how much the landscape has changed. He didn't just share his truth. He showed that, for the first time, country music might finally be ready to accept it. Top number 9, Ty Herndon image. In the 1990s, country music was booming, and so was Ty Herndon. With his powerful voice and emotional ballads, Herndon quickly rose to fame, scoring multiple hits and becoming a recognizable face in Nashville. Songs like What Mattered Most didn't just climb the charts. They defined him as a classic country storyteller, the kind audiences trusted and connected with. On the surface, his career followed the perfect trajectory. But behind that success, things were far more complicated. At a time when country music remained deeply conservative, Herndon was living with a truth he felt he could never reveal. Being openly gay in that era wasn't just risky, it could end everything overnight. So like many before him, he built a life that matched expectations, even if it didn't reflect reality. The pressure of that double life began to take its toll. As his career progressed, Herndon faced a series of personal struggles that became increasingly difficult to hide. Legal issues, substance abuse, and public incidents started to overshadow his musical achievements. To fans, it looked like a talented artist losing control. But beneath it all was a deeper battle, one rooted in identity, fear, and years of silence. For a long time, his story seemed to follow a familiar pattern: rise, fall, and quiet disappearance. Then came 2014. In a candid and emotional moment, Ty Herndon publicly came out as gay. Unlike the controlled image he had maintained for years, this was raw, honest, and deeply personal. He spoke openly about the struggles he had faced, not just with addiction, but with the psychological weight of hiding who he truly was. The response was different from what it might have been decades earlier. While there were still challenges, the industry had begun to shift. Herndon didn't return to the exact level of mainstream success he once had, but something more important changed: the narrative around his life. He was no longer seen simply as a troubled former star, but as someone who had endured and confronted a difficult reality. In the years that followed, he became an advocate for greater acceptance within country music, using his experience to support others facing similar struggles. Ty Herndon's story isn't just about fame or controversy. It's about what happens when a person is forced to live divided between who they are and who the world expects them to be, and the long road it takes to finally bring those two sides together. Because for Herndon, the truth didn't just change his career. It changed his survival. Number 8, Billy Gilman image. At just 11 years old, Billy Gilman did something most artists never achieve in a lifetime. His debut single, One Voice, became a massive hit, turning him into one of the youngest stars in country music history. With his angelic voice and innocent image, Gilman quickly became a household name. He performed for presidents, topped charts, and seemed destined for a long, unstoppable career in the spotlight. For a moment, he was everywhere. But as quickly as he rose, he began to disappear. As Gilman grew older, the industry that once celebrated him started to lose interest. His voice changed, trends shifted, and the image that had made him famous no longer fit. To the public, it looked like a familiar story, a child star who couldn't transition into adulthood. But that wasn't the full truth. Behind the scenes, Gilman was struggling with something far more personal. Growing up in an industry that valued a very specific kind of identity, he felt increasing pressure to hide who he really was. The fear of rejection from fans, labels, and the country music community created a silence that followed him into adulthood. For years, he stayed out of the spotlight. Then, in 2014, everything changed. In a heartfelt video message, Billy Gilman publicly came out as gay. It wasn't part of a publicity campaign or a career move. It was a deeply personal decision, made at a time when he was no longer at the center of the industry. For many fans who remembered him as a child star, the revelation was unexpected. But for Gilman, it was necessary. It marked the beginning of a new chapter. 2 years later, he stepped back into the spotlight on The Voice, reintroducing himself not as a former child prodigy, but as an artist who had lived, struggled, and grown. His performances were powerful, emotional, and carried a depth that hadn't been there before. Audiences didn't just hear his voice, they felt his story. While he didn't fully reclaim his early commercial success in country music, something more meaningful happened. Billy Gilman found his place again, this time on his own terms. His journey reflects a different kind of challenge within the industry. Not just hiding identity, but growing up under expectations that leave little room for change. From child to forgotten name, and finally to someone who reclaimed his voice, Gilman's story is about resilience. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't losing fame, it's finding the courage to return as your true self. Number 7, Katie Lang image. Long before country music was ready for change, Katie Lang was already challenging everything it stood for. Emerging in the late 1980s, she didn't fit the traditional mold of a country star, not in sound, not in image, and certainly not in attitude. With her androgynous style, sharp wit, and unmistakable voice, Lang quickly stood out in a genre built on convention. Critics praised her talent, audiences were intrigued, but the industry wasn't quite sure what to do with her. At first, her success spoke louder than any doubts. She earned critical acclaim, major awards, and a growing fan base that appreciated her unique blend of country, pop, and jazz influences. But even as her career gained momentum, there was an underlying tension. Nashville had always valued tradition, and Lang represented something entirely different, something unfamiliar, and for some, uncomfortable. Then came the moment that changed everything. In the early 1990s, Katie Lang publicly identified as gay. At a time when few artists in any genre were open about their sexuality, especially in country music, the impact was immediate. This wasn't just a personal revelation. It was a direct challenge to an industry that had long avoided conversations about identity. The backlash was swift. Radio stations distanced themselves. Parts of the country audience turned away. And within Nashville, doors that had once been open began to close. It wasn't a dramatic collapse overnight, but a gradual shift, a quiet pulling back that signaled she no longer fit the industry's expectations. Faced with that reality, Lang made a choice. Instead of trying to adapt, she moved forward on her own terms. She shifted her musical direction, stepping away from traditional country and into a broader, more global sound. And in doing so, she didn't just survive, she thrived. Her success expanded beyond Nashville, earning international recognition and solidifying her as one of the most distinctive voices of her generation. But her story remains deeply connected to country music. Because Katie Lang wasn't just an artist who came out. She was one of the first to do it at a time when the cost was unavoidable. There was no roadmap, no wave of support, no guarantee of acceptance. Only the certainty that being honest would change everything. And it did. Her journey reflects a turning point, not because it immediately transformed the industry, but because it exposed its limits. Years later, as new artists began to speak more openly, her story stood as a reminder of what it once meant to take that risk. She didn't wait for country music to evolve. She forced it to confront a truth it could no longer ignore. Number 6, Brandi Carlile image. By the time Brandi Carlile rose to prominence, the rules of country music were already beginning to shift, but not nearly enough to make her path easy. Unlike earlier generations who were forced to hide, Carlile entered the industry with a quiet but firm sense of identity. She didn't arrive as a traditional Nashville product. Her music blended country, folk, and Americana, and her storytelling carried a raw emotional depth that set her apart. From the beginning, she wasn't trying to fit into a mold. She was building her own space. And that made all the difference. Carlile was openly gay early in her career, something that, even in the 2000s, still carried risk in country-adjacent genres. But instead of centering her identity as controversy, she allowed her music to speak first. Songs about love, heartbreak, and family resonated widely, not because they challenged norms, but because they felt honest and universal. Still, the industry wasn't entirely neutral. Mainstream country radio never fully embraced her in the way it did more conventional artists. While she built a loyal and growing fan base, much of her success came outside the traditional Nashville system. She thrived in spaces that allowed more artistic freedom, festivals, alternative country circuits, and eventually global stages. And over time, that path proved powerful. Carlisle's career didn't just grow, it expanded far beyond what many expected. She earned multiple Grammy Awards, critical acclaim, and a reputation as one of the most respected voices of her generation. More importantly, she did it without ever compromising who she was. Her success represents something different from the stories that came before. Where artists like Chelly Wright and Katie Lang faced direct backlash for being open, Carlisle's journey shows a more subtle shift. One where authenticity no longer guarantees rejection, but still requires navigating an industry that hasn't fully caught up. She didn't have to come out in a dramatic moment. She simply existed, openly and consistently, in a space that once made that nearly impossible. And in doing so, she redefined what success could look like. Brandi Carlile's story isn't about a single turning point or a moment of revelation. It's about persistence, about building a career on truth, even when the traditional system offers limited support. Because sometimes change doesn't happen through confrontation. Sometimes it happens through quiet, undeniable success that proves the old rules no longer apply. Option number 5, Orville Peck Image. In a genre built on tradition and identity, Orville Peck did something no one expected. He hid his face. From the very beginning, Peck appeared in public wearing a fringed mask, a striking, almost theatrical image that immediately set him apart from every other artist in country music. In a world where authenticity is often tied to visibility, choosing anonymity seemed like a contradiction. But for Peck, it was something else entirely. It wasn't about hiding who he was. It was about controlling how the world saw him. As an openly gay country artist, Orville Peck entered a space that had historically struggled with acceptance. But instead of confronting the industry directly, he approached it from a different angle. His music leaned heavily into classic country influences, deep vocals, cinematic storytelling, and themes of loneliness, longing, and identity. Everything about his sound felt familiar. And yet, everything about his image challenged expectations. The mask became more than just a visual signature. It created a boundary between the artist and the audience, a way to separate personal identity from public perception. In doing so, Peck shifted the focus back to the music itself, allowing listeners to connect with the emotion before forming judgments about the person behind it. It was a subtle but powerful move. Because while earlier artists had to fight for acceptance by revealing everything, Peck demonstrated that control over one's narrative could be just as impactful. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for validation. He simply existed, confidently, creatively, and unapologetically. And the response was different. Rather than facing the kind of backlash that defined previous generations, Peck found a growing audience that embraced both his sound and his uniqueness. Critics praised his work, fans were drawn to the mystery, and slowly, he carved out a space where being different wasn't a limitation, it was the appeal. His success reflects a new phase in country music's evolution. Not complete acceptance, but a widening of possibilities. A recognition that identity doesn't have to fit a single narrative, and that artists can define themselves in ways that feel true to them. Orville Peck didn't just come into country music as an outsider. He reshaped the way identity could be presented within it. Because sometimes, the most powerful statement isn't revealing everything. It's choosing exactly what to reveal and doing it on your own terms. Number 4, Shane McAnally. Image. Not every powerful figure in country music stands in front of a microphone. Some of the most influential voices are never seen by the audience at all. Shane McAnally is one of those voices. If you've listened to country music over the past 2 decades, chances are you've heard his work, even if you didn't know his name. As a songwriter and producer, McAnally has been behind an extraordinary number of hit songs for major artists, shaping the sound of modern country from the inside. His influence runs deep through Nashville, woven into the success of others. But his journey into that position wasn't simple. Early in his career, McAnally pursued life as a performer. Like many aspiring artists, he stepped into the spotlight with hopes of building his own name. But the path didn't unfold the way he expected. His time as a solo artist was brief, and eventually he transitioned away from performing, moving into songwriting, where he found his true strength. Behind the scenes, however, there was another layer to his story. As a gay man in an industry long defined by traditional values, McAnally understood the importance of navigating carefully. Even outside the spotlight, Nashville's culture carried expectations, subtle but real. Success often depended not just on talent, but on relationships, perception, and trust within a tightly connected community. And for a time, that meant keeping parts of himself private. But as his career grew, so did his confidence. McAnally eventually became open about his identity, not through a dramatic public moment, but through consistency and presence. He didn't frame it as a revelation. He simply lived openly, allowing his work and reputation to speak for themselves. And the results were undeniable. He went on to win multiple CMA awards and Grammys, becoming one of the most respected songwriters in the industry. Artists continued to seek him out. His influence only expanded. In a space where visibility once carried risk, McAnally proved that authenticity and success could coexist, even behind the scenes. His story represents a different kind of impact. While performers often carry the public narrative of change, figures like Shane McAnally reshape the industry from within. They influence the stories being told, the voices being heard, and the direction the music itself takes. He didn't need a spotlight to make a statement. Because sometimes the most meaningful change doesn't happen on stage. It happens quietly, in the rooms where the music is written and where the future of an entire genre is decided. Number 3, Lil Nas X image. In 2019, a song came out of nowhere and changed everything. Old Town Road didn't just become a hit, it became a cultural phenomenon. Blending country imagery with hip-hop rhythm, the track broke records, dominated charts, and sparked one of the biggest genre debates in modern music. And at the center of it all was a young artist no one had seen coming, Lil Nas X. At first, the conversation was about the music. Was it country? Was it not? Did it belong in Nashville's world? Or was it something entirely different? The industry itself seemed unsure, and the debate only fueled the song's rise. But behind the viral success, there was another moment quietly approaching, one that would redefine the story completely. Soon after reaching global fame, Lil Nas X publicly came out as gay. It wasn't framed as a confession or a dramatic reveal. Instead, it was subtle, almost understated. A message to fans that invited them to look closer, to understand the layers behind the artist they had just discovered. But the impact was anything but small. Because in the world of country, even on its edges, this was unprecedented. A young, black artist, a genre-blending hit, and now, an openly gay identity. It challenged not just one expectation, but several at once. For some, it was a powerful symbol of progress. For others, it pushed too far beyond what they believed country music should represent. But Lil Nas X didn't step back. Instead, he leaned into who he was even more boldly. His visuals became more expressive, his performances more daring, and his identity more central to his artistry. Rather than adapting to fit the genre, he expanded the definition of what could exist within it. And in doing so, he shifted the conversation. His presence forced the industry and its audience to confront questions that had long been avoided. Not just about sexuality, but about race, genre boundaries, and the very idea of tradition in country music. Lil Nas X's story isn't a traditional country narrative. He didn't come up through Nashville. He didn't follow the expected path. And yet, his impact on the genre is undeniable. Because sometimes change doesn't come from within. Sometimes it arrives from the outside, unexpected, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. And when it does, it doesn't just challenge the system. It forces it to evolve. Number 2, Lavender Country. Image, long before country music began to even whisper about acceptance, there was a voice that spoke loudly and was almost completely erased. That voice belonged to Patrick Haggerty, the man behind Lavender Country. In 1973, at a time when being openly gay could cost you not just your career but your safety, Haggerty did something almost unthinkable. He released what is widely considered the first openly gay country album. Not hidden in metaphor, not disguised in coded lyrics, but direct, unapologetic, and impossible to misunderstand. And that was the problem. Because country music in the 1970s wasn't just conservative, it was closed. The genre was built around traditional values, and anything that challenged that image was pushed out, ignored, or silenced. Lavender Country didn't just challenge the system. It confronted it head-on. The result was immediate and devastating. The album received virtually no mainstream support. Radio refused to play it. The industry turned away. And despite its groundbreaking nature, it disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. What should have been a historic moment in music became a forgotten footnote. For years, it was as if it never existed. Patrick Haggerty didn't become a star. He didn't tour the world or dominate charts. Instead, his work lived quietly on the margins, passed between small communities, remembered by those who understood its significance, but ignored by the industry that had rejected it. But history has a way of resurfacing what was once buried. Decades later, as conversations around identity and representation began to grow, Lavender Country was rediscovered. The same album that had once been silenced was now seen for what it truly was, a bold, fearless statement made far ahead of its time. And suddenly, everything looked different. What had been dismissed became groundbreaking. What had been ignored became influential. And Patrick Haggerty, once pushed to the edges, was finally recognized as a pioneer. His story stands apart from the others. While many artists struggled in silence or waited for the right moment to speak, Haggerty never hid. He didn't adapt to the system. He didn't wait for acceptance. He told the truth at a time when the world had no interest in hearing it, and he paid the price for it. But without voices like his, the progress seen today might never have begun. Because before country music could change, someone had to be brave enough to challenge it first. Hiểu rồi, bạn cần nhân vật hoàn toàn mới, không trùng bất kỳ ai đã viết và đủ đắt để làm ending. Mình đổi hướng ngay. Number 1, Steve Grand image. By the time Steve Grand appeared, the rules hadn't disappeared. They had just become quieter. For decades, country music had made one thing clear. There were stories it was willing to tell and stories it wasn't. And for a long time, love songs in this genre followed a very specific script. Boy meets girl. Heartbreak follows. Tradition stays intact. Then, in 2013, Steve Grand changed the script. Not slowly, not subtly, all at once. His song All American Boy wasn't just another country track. It looked like one. It sounded like one. But at its core, it told a story country music had never truly embraced before. A gay love story, told openly, without metaphor, without disguise. And he didn't release it through a major label. He uploaded it himself. Within days, the video went viral. Millions of views, headlines everywhere. A new name suddenly at the center of a conversation Nashville had avoided for decades. For the first time, audiences were seeing a country artist who didn't just come out. He built his entire identity around being open from the very beginning. But viral success and industry acceptance are two very different things. Despite the attention, mainstream country radio remained distant. Labels didn't rush in the way they might have for a traditional breakout star. The system hadn't fully caught up yet, and Grand was operating outside of it. So he did something even more unusual. He kept going, independently, releasing music, building a fan base, touring without the backing of the traditional Nashville machine. His career didn't follow the path of chart-topping country stars, but it also didn't disappear. Instead, it carved out a new lane, one that existed parallel to the industry rather than inside it. And that's what makes his story powerful. Steve Grand didn't wait for country music to change. He acted as if it already had. His presence forced a new kind of visibility, one where being openly gay wasn't a reveal or a late career confession, but the starting point. No secrecy, no double life, just honesty from day one. And while the industry hesitated, the audience didn't. Because sometimes the biggest shift doesn't happen when the system accepts something new. It happens when someone proves they don't need that system at all.